WTFR. Disclaimer. Disclaimer. This edition of Two's Company 3's Allowed, just like every edition of Two's Company 3's Allowed, is going to be very naughty. Disclaimer. Disclaimer. This edition of Two's Company 3's Allowed will contain bad language, condescension, mock value. Disclaimer. Disclaimer. If you are a little pussy bitch, you may not want to listen to this show. Disclaimer over and out.
Welcome to Two's Company 3's Allowed with your host from the land down under, Shaun, a.k.a. Surplus.
Shaun, a.k.a. Surplus.
Dissecting the latest news on the issues that invade your privacy and take away your rights as we move closer to a one-world government. And finding solutions alongside you, the listener, to fight against the New World Order. And now, here's your host, Shaun.
A.k.a. Surplus.
Yes, welcome ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two's Company 3's Allowed. Brought to you live by the one, the only WTFR. I'm your host, Shaun. I'm going to be with you for the next 2 hours. I do hope that you have your favourite adult beverage in your hand. You're going to need it for this show because we've got a special guest. This special guest, just to give you a little bit of background I met her pretty much very briefly on the previous network that I was working for. She was a guest on that network at the time, and she said but one sentence. She threw but one sentence out to me. I was the audio engineer at the time, and it was my birthday. So she wished me a happy birthday and said, happy birthday and all the best wishes for the future, Shaun. So there we go. Now, she's a lady that understands exactly what's going on in South Africa, and I'll allow her to explain it to you because, albeit that I can be quite articulate with what she knows and why, it's better when it comes from herself, a person that has actually lived and seen firsthand what is going on in South Africa when it comes to the ongoing white genocide and such. We have with us Karin Smith. Karin, welcome to the broadcast. Thank you so much for having me on, Shaun. You're more than welcome. It's good to actually get to talk to you finally because we've never been able to directly talk with each other just yet, and given the recent turn of events, I thought, what's not a better time to get you on and talk up a storm? Well, there's so much happening in South Africa, Shaun. It's almost impossible to explain it to people who haven't either been there or been following it. And that is why mostly I try and start from the very beginning, because to understand where we're at now, you need to understand the history. Yes. But because of shortage of time, I think where I'd like to start is in about 1992. So that's after as the apartheid system was failing, Nelson Mandela was out of jail, living in a cottage on the prison grounds. He had a butler, a swimming pool, a pool table. He entertained world dignitaries at his so-called prison. All of us should be in a prison like that. It would be quite nice, I think. Yeah. So that's where I'd like to start, because we can't go into 400 years of history tonight. Right, exactly. No, please, by all means, you start where you want to start. I mean, I would especially like you to touch upon before apartheid and after apartheid, and then go from there, because you know, a lot of people don't even understand the word apartheid, let alone what it means. I mean, over here in Australia, when I speak to people about apartheid, I'm literally educating them because they just have no idea what I'm talking about. Please, go ahead. The floor's yours. You see, that's the whole trouble, Shaun. That's why I always go into a really long story about the history of South Africa. Because I've been on air practically 24/7 the last week, and I'm absolutely finished. Without understanding the background to it, you won't understand where we are today. But apartheid literally was a British system installed by the British when they were in charge of South Africa, they started in about 1910. Now, originally there were two little Boer republics called the Orange Free State and the Transvaal. And in the one, diamonds were discovered, and in the other, gold was discovered. So the British, having come through some wars and trying to expand their colonies, because as you know, they had the most red on the world at that time, red being a British colony, they were pretty running out of money. So when they were discovered in these two Boer colonies, which were accepted as countries by the rest of the world, they decided, no. These little Afrikaner colonies can't have these riches, so we're going to take them. Now, the one country where diamonds were discovered, which was the Orange Free State, said to them, okay, the diamonds are on the outskirts, the outer rim of our country. You can have them. We're not going to fight a war about it. You can have them. We don't need the money. Take them. So that was all well and good. But when gold was discovered, it was in the very center of the Transvaal Republic, which was in Johannesburg. And so there was no way they could do a sort of a trade-off and say, look, we want peace and you can have the gold. It just couldn't have worked like that. So the British brought in 45,000 troops from Britain to, in a military fashion, take these gold mines away. And they fought the Boer War. There were two Boer Wars, but this is the second Boer War we're talking about here. And what they did was the Boers didn't have a fixed army that was paid by the state. They were just farmers who came in on commando.
Now so before you go on, could you put a little bit of emphasis on the Boers, because a lot of people don't even know what that word means, let alone...
All right.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So in 1652, the Dutch landed at the Cape of Good Hope. The Portuguese had been there before them, but decided they didn't want anything to do with it and sailed away after planting a great big cross there. And the Dutch settled there, but they did not come to colonize. What they came to do was to open a refreshment station for passing ships, because it was kind of the halfway point on their route to the east, where they were trading silks and spices and things.
Right.
And the Cape of Good Hope, which is where Cape Town is today, is a very, very dangerous coast. The warm sea and the cold sea come together right there. And the waves are huge, and it's a very, very dangerous place for ships. And the sailors were dying of scurvy because they had no halfway provisioning site. So the Dutch East India Company sent Jan van Riebeeck to just open a provision station for the ships passing. And he landed there, I think it was with 65 people. And the only people that they found there at the time, and this is a critical point in what happens today in South Africa, there were no blacks as you know them. You know, the tall South Africa, everybody's seen Shaka Zulu, I'm sure. There were none of that kind of black in Southern Africa at that time. The only people that they found there were a small race of people called the Khoi, which means men of men. They're little, almost Asian-featured people. They're not black. They're almost an orange-brown. They're tiny people, and they move in family units. They were nomadic. They are not Christian. They're spiritual people. They believe, like the American Indians did, that you have to live in harmony with the earth. So the people that came with the Dutch East India Company were indentured servants, most of them. But as you know, you could buy your way out of indentured servitude. So when those people started buying their way out, they then got land and started farming on their own. And but they had to sell to the Dutch East India Company only at prices set by the Dutch East India Company. So eventually there were tons of wars with the Khoi, because the Khoi were trading their cattle and sheep with the Dutch, and the Dutch took the land, the Khoi then took the animals in return, and there were a lot of scuffles and fights. They call it the 100-Year Wars. There were plenty battles with the Khoi. But only 150 years after the Dutch landed at the Cape, And the Afrikaners, who are then Boers, Boer in Afrikaans translates to farmer. And that's literally what they were. They were a farming nation. And Afrikaans relates to the language that is a kind of a bastardized Dutch in order to communicate with the Khoi people. They invented this language that everybody spoke together. It was called kitchen kaffa, and kaffa is a very rude word in South Africa nowadays. It's not allowed to be said, but it comes from the Arabic, which means unbeliever. A kafir in Arabic is an unbeliever. But you cannot call black people that in South Africa anymore. Anyway, so the Boers then decided there was a whole kerfuffle. The Dutch were conquered by the Dutch colony was conquered by the British, and then the Dutch got it back again. And these farmers did not like living under either of them. They're very Calvinistic people, and they thought that the British and the Dutch were too frivolous, and they didn't like them at all. So, and they also didn't like paying taxes. So they decided that they're going to pack up their wagons and they're going to trek inland. And they did, and there were many, when they met up with the Zulu nation, which was also then a forming nation. It wasn't a nation as it is today. They came from much further north. And as they were sweeping down south looking for better grazing, they committed a thing called the Defakani or the Mafakani. They would obliterate every tribe in their way. They would kill the men, take the women as concubines, take the children as slaves, take the cattle, and set the earth on fire. So the Boers were going north, and the Zulu, what was to be the Zulu nation, were coming south, and they met at the Fish River, and there were some horrific battles between the two lots, which I'm not going to go into now for lack of time. But so that's essentially who the Boers were. Understood. And after many battles with the blacks, they then went and signed a treaty with the then king of the Zulus, Dingaan. They sent a group of people to sign, led by Piet Retief, to go and sign a treaty with him that the Zulus would have their land and the white Boers would have their land, and they would sign a peace treaty. They would not attack each other, and everybody would live in peace. But the Zulu king said to them, look, a cousin of mine has stolen all our cattle. So before I'm prepared to even talk to you, go and find him, hunt him down, bring my cattle back to my kraal, which they subsequently did. And that night there was a huge feast arranged to celebrate this peace treaty. But in the middle of the feast, Dingaan gave his impis, which are Zulu brigades of warriors, he gave them the call, Bulala Tugati, which means kill the white wizards. And they slaughtered this whole party of Piet Retief's people and fanned out and went miles to where the party of men had left the women and children and slaughtered them. And it was one of those awful battles between the whites and the blacks. And somehow that treaty for the land that they both put their thumbprints on survived that. And we have it to this day that the Zulu nation sold that piece of land or ceded that piece of land to the Boers.
Okay, we're about to come to the first break of the broadcast there, Karin. This is fascinating history. I mean, already, albeit that I've been well aware of you and your information for quite a while, there's a few points here that I did not know, and this is why I wanted to have you on the broadcast, because number one, you've lived there in South Africa, of course, and number two, because you have your facts backing you up. So this is just absolutely fantastic stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, Karin Smith, my special guest, and myself, Shaun, will be back with you in just a few moments. Stick with us.
This program contains material which some audiences might find objectionable. We suggest that you use discretion while listening. After all, you have free will and can turn it off if you don't like the content. So, if you choose to listen to the entire program and then write us to complain that you were appalled by what you heard, you can blow it out your ass. You were warned. Thank you.
An old man by a seashore at the end of day gazes the horizon where the sea winds in his face. Tempest tossed island, seasons all the same. Anchorage and painted and a ship without a name.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to WTFR, where thought is free radio. If you haven't already, get on over to TCTAunleashed.com and take a look at what we've got to offer. If you're interested in becoming a host, by all means give me a yell. DESSNR@hotmail.com. That's DESSNR@hotmail.com. Again, thanks for listening. I just wonder what it would be like to be reincarnated as an animal whose species had been so reduced in numbers that it was in danger of extinction. What would be its feelings toward the human species whose population explosion had denied it somewhere to exist? I must confess that I am tempted to ask for reincarnation as a particularly deadly virus. This was your very own Prince Poofter Philip, ladies and gentlemen. Two's Company 3's Allowed. With me, my special guest, Karin Smith, talking about what has taken place in history when it comes to South Africa so that we can get an understanding of a recent turn of events that we'll be discussing very soon. Karin, please continue. You were talking about how the Zulus called it the seeding, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to the land, the meet up in the land.
Yeah. Yeah, but two points that I've given, I need to put some real stress on them. A, the Khoi were the only people at the Cape when we landed there. It was 150 years before we came across the black nations, because there are at least 11 tribes of them. So it's really hard to say the Zulus, because that's not who they are. There's a whole bunch of them. There's the Zulus, the Pedis, the Swana, the Venda. There are 11 official languages in South Africa and 11 officially recognized groups of black people in South Africa. So it's very hard to say it was one group or the other at that time.
Right.
Anyway, so we're flying through a whole bunch of history here, but the trekkers, who were then the Boers, then formed these two colonies and had the First and Second World War. Now, during the Second World War, the British brought in, as I say, from England, because this is how seriously they considered this. They brought in 45,000 soldiers into South Africa, but they had colonized Natal, which is on the east coast of South Africa, and it is quite a long way inland. It's 8 hours by car to Johannesburg, so you can imagine what it's like when you're marching with an army. It's a great distance. And they had not learned yet to fight the guerrilla tactics that the Boers did. So they came marching along in their red jackets and their white pants, and the little drummer boy in the front beating his drums and raising clouds of dust, and they had long drawn-out supply lines. But the Boers, who did not have a standing army, they were called up and they went to fight, but they had to bring their horse, their Martini Henry, which was their front loader gun. You know those ones that you put gunpowder in, and then a cloth, and then a bullet, and then you tamp it all down with a long. Yeah, they had those, and they had to bring that and 7 days' food with them. So off they went to war, and it must have been quite a funny sight, because these guys didn't have uniforms. They rode in very loose-knit commandos. They could go home to harvest their crops, and every farm in South Africa was at their disposal as a supply place. So they could go, any one of them could go to any farm, and the wife who'd been left behind would feed them, overnight them, feed the horse, give them a change of clothes, etc. So they had much more freedom of movement than this enormous British army that marched as one. And they would come out from behind a hill. They mostly wore brown clothes made from animal skins, you know, I mean, they had jackets made from animal skin and things like that.
Yeah.
And they'd rush out on their little tough Boer ponies from behind a hill, attack the supply lines and disappear before the British even knew what was happening to them. So it was quite a shock to the British that these people don't play cricket, you know. Yeah. It's not quite cricket to fight a war in this way. And they didn't like it at all. But so the British were taking a massive beating, and they realized that the Boers, every farmer was a traitorous household from their point of view. So what they did was they took the women and children and the elderly and put them in concentration camps. I believe these were the second concentration camps known in the world. I would not swear to it, but I believe that they had the same thing in India. The British had done this.
Yeah.
Anyway, they put these people in concentration camps, salted the land, burnt the farms, and poisoned the water, so that the Boers had nowhere to supply themselves.
That's right. There's a good saying about that. It's if you can't find your enemy, at least give them nowhere to land, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So that is what they were doing, because they saw they couldn't win. They could not win by conventional methods, and they didn't know how to fight the way the Boers were fighting. So, thousands, 25% estimated of the Boer population died in those camps of cholera, dysentery, starvation, all kinds of terrible, terrible diseases, because the Brits did not care one bit about them. They just wanted to keep them contained and stop the Boers from having a supply line. So they did not win that war militarily at all. They won it because the Boers, who were fighting for their families and their farms, had nothing to fight for. Their women and children and parents were dying in these camps. Their farms were burnt down. And to save any more death in the camps, the Boers surrendered. And it's a very, very bad point in history there, because the Afrikaner, some of them like to be called Afrikaners and some of them like to be called Boers. It's a contentious subject in South Africa.
Yeah.
The Boers to this day do not like English-speaking people, because they hold us responsible for those thousands, tens of thousands of deaths in the camps.
Do they still speak the bastardized version of Dutch?
Yes, they do, but, and Shaun, this is very interesting. Only 3 new languages have been recognized in the world in the last 100 or so years. And Afrikaans is one of them. Now, it is a much more well-formulated language than it was in those days, because then it was just a pidgin language to speak to the local population. Today it is a totally formulated language, and they are very proud of it. And this is part of the genocide of the Boer population in South Africa today, genociding their culture. But we will get to that.
Right.
So in 1910, the British ruled South Africa. And in 1913, they brought in the Land Act, which said that black people cannot own land. They also brought in the whole system of apartheid, so that there were no cross-race marriages, no sex across the the races, and all the basic tenets of apartheid were brought in by the British in 1910. And in 1948, the Boers won the vote, the election. So the Nationalist Party got into power. But we were still under British rule. Just the Boer people ruled in Parliament. And so obviously those rules of the British were still in place. All the apartheid rules that they had brought in were in place. And in 1962, we got independence from the British. And President at that time, President Verwoerd, said, look, the best, but the British had in the meantime taken all of South Africa, shoved it into one amalgamated mush, and said, okay, you can rule over this. Now, you know very well that disparate races cannot live together in peace.
That's right.
And when you have a ton of, 13 or more black tribes who all war with each other, and you're pushing them into a small area and saying you will live together here, and that's the end of it, it is not going to work.
And a good example of that is what's going on over here in Australia, just to bolster what you're saying there, Karin. There's certain parts of Australia, certain cities where our government seems to think that shoving Somalian people into community housing and things like that, they don't separate the tribes. They don't think of the difference between the tribes. They just think, okay, you're Somalian, you go here. But here's the thing: each different tribe throughout this Somalian race have totally different ideals and such, and end up either one injuring each other on a daily basis or killing each other.
Yes, and everyone around them as well.
Yes.
Because inherent, I really am sorry to say this, but in my opinion, inherent in the black race is violence and atrocities that the white race very seldom thinks of to perform on other people. I know there are terrible white people. I know that white people have done dreadful wrongs to other races throughout the world. But the things that these blacks do are unbelievable. However, I will get to that part of where we're at today.
Yep.
So here we're all pushed together in one area. And our President Verwoerd said, look, the only way to establish peace in this country of ours is to give everybody self-determination. So each tribe will have their own piece of land. They will be ruled by their own king or chief, whichever they have. They will live under their own rules and their own culture. But the white taxpayer will provide them with clean running water, with hospitals, with electricity, with schools, with universities, with roads, with infrastructure, etc., etc.
This sounds very similar to what's going on in Sudan, Darfur. I've been on and off working in the past with a gentleman by the name of Ed Lyons that works for the Persecution Project Foundation. And to this day, there's a lot of white Christians over there supplying the black South Africans with water wells and things of that nature. So it sounds like what's happened in the past has been passed into the future. We're about to come to another break, hence why I've interrupted you. But in fact, I actually helped get 2,000 pairs of shoes for the backward peoples over there because they get these worms that crawl up through the pores of their feet.
Yes.
And it's pretty terrible. Like some of these kids end up dead, but this was back when I was a little bit wet behind the ears. But either way, I was proud of what I'd done at the time. And you've got the Janjaweed that are just coming through these villages. Janjaweed, I'm not sure if you know, Karin, you probably do, translates to devils on horseback. And they're actually hired by their black government to go and slaughter anybody who's converting from Islam to Christianity. It's just truly terrible. They kill their own. They slaughter everybody they possibly can. We're coming to that break, ladies and gentlemen. My special guest, Karin Smith. Fascinating information indeed. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Everybody had to be a hero, get one in the heart. Night would fall and call it.
From the Urban Dictionary, farting glances. When a small group or crowd suddenly realises that someone has emitted a silent but nasty fart, and they all look among themselves for facial expressions or body language that might pinpoint the perpetrator. The group by the bar was festive, but suddenly all was quiet, and everyone was looking among themselves with farting glances. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to WTFR, where thought is free radio. If you haven't already, get on over to TCTAunleashed.com and take a look at what we've got to offer. If you're interested in becoming a host, by all means give me a yell. DESSNR@hotmail.com. That's DESSNR@hotmail.com. Again, thanks for listening.
On the wild and misty hillside, fear is nature's warning. Hunger here is never far away, and all of this world is for children who play. Days that never end, always should remain.
Now, an army may be likened to water, for just as flowing water avoids the heights and hastens to the lowlands, so an army should avoid strength and strike weakness. And as water shapes its flow in accordance with the ground, so an army manages its victory in accordance with the situation of the enemy. And as water has no constant form, there are in warfare no constant conditions. Thus, one able to win the victory by modifying his tactics in accordance with the enemy situation may be said to be divine. Of the 5 elements, water, fire, metal, wood, and earth, none is always predominant. Of the 4 seasons, none lasts forever. Of the days, some are long and some are short, and the moon waxes and wanes. That is also the law of employing troops.
News Company 3's Allowed. With me, my special guest, Karin Smith, and we're talking up a storm here when it comes to South Africa. And before the break, Karin was talking about how what was going on within apartheid. Please, Karin, continue with your speech there about how it was to a point where the whites had to look after the blacks to a certain extent. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, which is still happening today. So President Verwoerd had this idea for grand apartheid. Now, apartheid just translated means separateness, essentially separate development. And he just said that each tribe, including the white tribe, must live separately under their own rules, in their own way. And it worked quite well. But the problem was that there were never more than 6 million whites in South Africa, ever in the whole history of South Africa. And with the gold and the diamond mines and a flourishing economy and roads being needed to be built and railways being needed to be built, they employed these black people. So the blacks started then pouring in from all over Africa to have some part of this economic wealth. And it became a problem. So in South Africa itself, we had rules that were like white by night. If a black person was found on the street at night, he had to have a damn good reason for being there, or else he was thrown in jail. Now, obviously, there were some real bad things that were done under this rule, because people are people, and you give them a uniform or you give them a bit of power, and they do evil things. So there were, I will never deny that there was evil done during the apartheid years. But this was the only way that they could think of to keep the minority whites safe from the endless hordes of black people who wanted to come into the country and share in this prosperity. But my point is, if people think that we oppressed the blacks and we killed millions of them, that is not true. The black population, if apartheid lasted 50 years, in that time, the black population grew 920%.
Holy goodness.
So if we were so wicked, how was that possible? And they say we didn't provide them with education. But Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela both became lawyers under the apartheid system in black universities. So that also is just thrown right out the window. Zululand, where the Zulu King to this day rules, is some of the best agricultural land in the whole of South Africa. It is subtropical. I mean, you just drop a pip on the ground and the fruit grows. It is the best land in South Africa. And the black theory is that we gave them land where they couldn't exist, which is not true, because if you overlay a map of the Bantustans, as they were called, with the rainfall map of South Africa, the whites were left with the least arable, most awful land, because South Africa is inhospitable. You know that in Australia. You have desert, you have heat, you have areas where nothing grows.
That's right.
You have lack of water. We don't have navigable rivers. They run maybe once a year when it rains, you know. So South Africa is very harsh climate and very hard to farm there. And the blacks had really good land. So the real problem started when the blacks refused to be taught in Afrikaans in their schools. They wanted to be taught in their own languages. Now, it is very difficult to teach somebody in their own language when school books don't exist and the language doesn't have words for scientific, mathematical things. You know, how do you even write a textbook when there aren't words in the language to encompass those ideas? But they then rioted. And what they did in the 1976 riots was they put the school children in front of the crowds. Now, a week before that, they had attacked a police station and killed the policeman there and bombed the police station. And the police were extremely nervous and on tenterhooks about this whole thing. Anyway, somebody in the crowd fired. Whether it was the police or the crowd, we don't know to this day. Somebody fired a shot and there was an absolute slaughter. And that is where that iconic picture that the whole world knows about apartheid is where a man came out of the crowds with a gun smoke around him carrying this young boy. It's a picture the whole world knows. And that's when the world started saying, look, this apartheid system is oppressive and it's disgusting and it has to end.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we had the rise of the ANC, which is the African Nationalist Congress, and Nelson Mandela was one of them. And he said that you cannot have a revolution without violence. So he formed the armed wing of the ANC, which is called Umkhonto weSizwe, which means Spear of the Nation. And they were Russian and Cuban trained in Angola, outside of the country. So we had this riots and kind of a civil war going on inside the country, and all our boys, when they left school, were conscripted into the army to go and fight the communists on the borders, the border wars, the Cubans and the Russians on the borders. And the rest of the world was quite happy that we were standing against the last country, because we're right at the tip of Africa. We were the last country in Africa to stand against communism, and the world was quite happy with that. But then there was an uproar about the oppressive regime and how terrible we were, so sanctions were put against South Africa. And although South Africa has every mineral under the sun, the one thing we do not have is oil. So it was very hard to fight a war internally and externally without oil. So we developed a way to get oil out of coal, which we have an abundance of, which supplied some of our fuel needs, but mainly for the army and the police force. We never made enough of it to supply the whole country. Anyway, the US decided that a red line for lifting sanctions was setting Nelson Mandela free. So the president went to Nelson Mandela in 1985 in his prison and said to him, look, we will set you free on only one condition, that you renounce violence. And Mandela said, I will not. So he stayed in his little bungalow, about a 5-bedroom house on the grounds of the prison, and continued his imprisonment there while writing a book called How to Be a Good Communist. Anyway, the world said to us that the red line on lifting the sanctions is freeing Nelson Mandela. So the government in 1992 put a referendum to the white people, with only people allowed to vote, and said to them, should we continue to negotiate with the ANC with a view to shared power? And the people who were war weary and had dead and broken sons from this continuing war said, yes, we should negotiate. Well, before we could blink, it was 1994. Nelson Mandela was the president. The majority had taken power, and the trouble really started for the whites in South Africa. The first thing that the ANC did was they disarmed the populace. Now, under the ANC government, we had to have a license for our firearms. So when the ANC came in, they had this nice database of who had a firearm, where they lived, and they took them away from us. So they disarmed us. Then we had a commando system where the outlying farms all joined together to protect the farmers because they were a very soft target. They disbanded the commando system. So the farmers were now left high and dry without firearms and without the commandos to protect them. Then our president started singing, kill the Boer, kill the farmer. Bring me my machine gun and we'll drive them into the sea. Which, of course, his people took as a mandate to kill as many people, white people, as possible.
And Nelson Mandela was later starting to sing those sorts of songs as well, kill the white people.
He sang it in front of the press and the whole presidents of the whole world.
Yeah.
He gave this great speech about the Rainbow Nation and then sang, we will kill the Boer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in his own language, so nobody knew what he was saying.
Exactly, yeah. I've seen the YouTube clip and the translations. It was just unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Anyway, so when apartheid ended, we had 125,000 productive farms. Today, we have 30,000, of which 20,000 are on the market because more than 4,000 farmers have been murdered. But now a murder in South Africa is not a drive-by shooting. They come to your house, they wait for you to come home, they tie up the father, they wait for the children to come home from school, they rape the wife with broken bottles and sharpened broomsticks, they rape the daughter, they pour boiling oil down your throat, they drown the children in boiling water, they cut the father's eyelids off so that he cannot close his eyes and not watch. And this can take up to 3 days. And then they leave, having stolen nothing. And they leave.
It's not about material to them. We're about to come to a break there, Karin. Sorry to cut you off, but it's not about material to them. They're not after the television. They're not after the car. As far as they're concerned, and I know that you may not necessarily come from the same angle that I will, but I have to say that, they are of a savage nature, and what they do is completely out of that savage nature. And if I may say, again, Karin may not believe this, ladies and gentlemen, but where I'm coming from here, if I may say that some people might email me saying, oh, well, the whites got what they deserve because the whites put blacks under the thumb in the first place when it comes to apartheid and everything like that. But if you ask me, it's in my full opinion that blacks need to be put under some form of thumb because of that very savagery, which is us whites do not, because we know how to control ourselves. We know how not to not be savage, if you will. We're coming up to that break. Ladies and gentlemen, my special guest, Karin Smith, and myself talking about South Africa, and we'll get back to talking about some of the barbarism that was going on over there all that way back when and is going on today.
When we whisper and I think of you,
What do you mean that there's Negroes running around the streets? I've never seen them before. Pass me that grey poupon.
The reason you've never seen them before is because you've never had to live in those neighbourhoods, sir.
Oh, don't be so ridiculous. I've travelled the world, I tell you. And on every tour I've ever been on, I've never ever seen a violent Negro.
I'm a-walking in the rain. Tears are falling and I feel a pain. Wishing you were here by me to end this misery. And I wonder, I wonder.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to WTFR, where thought is free radio. If you haven't already, get on over to tctaunleashed.com and take a look at what we've got to offer. If you're interested in becoming a host, by all means give me a yell. DESSNR@hotmail.com. That's DESSNR@hotmail.com. Again, thanks for listening.
Wishing on a dream to follow what it means, and I wish on all the rainbows that I've seen. I wish on all the people who really dream.
The basic thesis of Sun Tzu's The Art of War is to try overcome the enemy by wisdom, not by force alone. Sun Tzu believed that a military struggle was not only a competition between military forces, but also a comprehensive conflict embracing politics, economics, military force, and diplomacy. The attitude of Sun Tzu towards war is one of extreme prudence, earnestness, and seriousness. He said, "War is a matter of vital importance to the state, a matter of life or death, the road either to survival or to ruin. Hence, it is imperative that it be studied thoroughly." The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
TCTA coming at you live from WTFR. With me is my special guest, Karin Smith, and we're talking about South Africa, South Africa's history, also its present, and I dare say its future. Karin, you're absolutely right that this sort of stuff is barbaric. I mean, the idea that somebody could rape a young child with a broken bottle is just, it's something that, you know, we think we can imagine, but really can't. I mean, the horror of it. When people are presented with this information, they have a few images flick through their mind of what it may look like, but the smell of the blood, the sweat that goes on throughout that 3 days, and the torture and the pain and everything that comes with it, I don't think we could even come close to imagining that sort of thing. Please continue. People need to know this.
Well, Shaun, in the last couple of weeks, there have been some even worse ones. I mean, those things are, what I've told you is horrific, but what they, recently, an 86-year-old woman was held captive in her house for 2 days while they drilled holes in her legs with an electric drill until she bled to death. They took another 76-year-old woman and they ironed her with a hot iron all over her body. They do these terrible things to people. But for me, Shaun, I think those people die a lucky death. I would rather be dead after that than have to survive. But the father is generally left alive to show their power, that they can come back any time and there's nothing the men of South Africa can do. Now, as a man yourself, you understand that you know it's your duty to protect your family. You know that your duty is to look after them and love them and keep them safe. And these men haven't been able to do that.
Yeah.
So not only do they have those pictures in their head of what was done to their families, they have this immense failure of manhood.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they survive it, because how do you wake up every morning?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. How? I mean,
something not talk about. But it's one of those things that really gives me sleepless nights.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's been many of them that have probably committed suicide after something like that.
Oh, yes, there have been huge suicides. And the other thing that they do, Shaun, I'm never going to get through this. I'm sorry. But the other thing that they do is that there is an enormous HIV positive population in Africa.
There is, yeah.
It's probably the biggest population in Africa itself. So the witch doctors, which they really, really believe in, have told them that sex with a virgin will cure AIDS. Now, there are not very many grown-up virgins, so it kind of relates back to a baby, and of course not their own babies, white babies. So they steal and rape white babies in order to cure AIDS. Now, if that baby should live after that onslaught, they are AIDS infected.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is another thing that these people do, and it's inhuman. Shaun, it is.
There's no words for it. There's absolutely no words for what you're discussing here. I mean, we can swear and cuss behind the scenes and whatever, but it's just not going to explain what you're discussing here. This is beyond. This is, like you said, this is not human. This is. Again, there's no words.
There's no word for it. And you know, Shaun, there's not a single white family in South Africa that has not been touched by this violence. Not anybody. They shot my father, killed my father, shot my brother, raped my sister, mugged my daughter, beat up my brother and left him for dead. There's not a family in South Africa that has not been affected by this.
Yeah.
But to make it even worse, they then brought in these affirmative action laws called broad-based black economic empowerment. And these laws prevent whites from working. So, if you cannot work, it's a death sentence. A total death sentence. So you're a middle income family, and your dad has a good job, and the kids go to a good school, and you live in a decent house, and you lose your job, and you know you are never going to get another one. So you lose your car, your house, your good schooling, and you end up on the street. Now, there is no social welfare for white people in South Africa. None whatsoever. So nobody is going to help you. And on top of that, the businesses, because of this BBBEE system, are not allowed to donate to white charities. So there's absolutely no help forthcoming for these people. And I know time is short, but I would like to tell you about a place called Munseyville, which is a government arranged white squatter camp in South Africa.
Well, Karin, just to let you know too that if you want to go further through this show, you're more than welcome to. I mean, I can do extra hours. It's all up to you. I know that your voice, you've been 24/7 since the seceding that's taken place. You've been 24/7 helping rents out, and that's a lot to handle. But it's all up to you, ma'am.
Well, I'll just keep on talking. I do have to go on another show in another hour, but that's fine. I will keep on talking until we can't do this anymore, as long as you're happy with that.
Yes, by all means.
So these people now who are dispossessed and can't get a job and have no money and nowhere to go, they band together in little groups because there's a certain safety in numbers. But they are left to live in the bush and build houses out of cardboard boxes and street signs and whatever they can find and beg on the streets in order to feed their families that day. Now, there's a place, they formed one of these camps at a place called Coronationville, which was an abandoned caravan park in South Africa. And they'd been there for quite some time, so they had established vegetable gardens and little places where the women could work together and do sewing and knitting and sell it for some income. And they had quite a not nice, but as good as one can have in an informal settlement going there. So the government didn't like this at all and told them that they had to leave. Now, the government kind of shot themselves in the foot there because they passed a law saying that if somebody, this is great, if you're on vacation, for instance, and a black family moves into your house while you're away, and they've been there more than 24 hours, you cannot throw them out. You have to go to court, which can take you years to get them out. And when you finally do evict them, you have to provide them with a place to go to.
This is what I'm saying. Again, I've got to make this disclaimer continuously because people could confuse my thoughts with yours, but my thoughts on this are it reflects the IQ, because only a low IQ would create such barbaric and ridiculous laws to any human being. It's just unbelievable to me. But please go ahead.
So there was a big court battle about that. There is a really great activist from South Africa who's no longer in the country. Her name is Sunette Bridges. And she fought an enormously expensive court battle on behalf of these people. And eventually we won, to the degree that they still had to leave, but the government would give them a place to live. So we all took a deep sigh of relief and thought, okay, this is going to be okay. Well, they moved them onto an unreconstituted garbage heap that had been recently closed down for dumping garbage. And on this garbage heap was no flooring, no foundations, because they said they're not going to put up any permanent structures. They put up corrugated iron buildings, 4 walls and a roof, no windows, and a door. And they moved these people in there. And the first night that they were there was an incredible storm, incredible. So they were hip deep in this garbage. Now, you can imagine, you know yourself what is floating in garbage.
Yeah.
I don't go into great detail about it. They were hip deep in this old elderly people who had mattresses on this filthy, dirty floors, etc. And some of the houses blew away. They were found 2 blocks down the road because the wind just picked them up and blew them. So we asked the government, could we please put concrete floors into these houses so that the people had some kind of decent living? And they said no. They said, no, we can't. Now, there are 300 families there, and there were 3 taps with running water. No toilets, nothing, no hot water, nothing, no electricity. So these people are cooking on fires, heating little pots full of water to keep their kids and themselves clean. We did put in faucets. We did put in floors. We built a very non-permanent structure school. This camp is on the outskirts of a black squatter camp, an enormous, sprawling black squatter camp. And when it rains, all the garbage from the squatter camp comes flooding through this place. And it's called Muncieville, and it is the most horrible thing. So we put up retaining walls to try and stop that. So one night, the blacks decided to riot, and they came for the
hold those thoughts, Karin, because we're coming into the second hour break. This is a long break, so if you need to grab a cup of tea or whatever, you can do so. But I've got to say that what I'm hearing here, it makes me want to reach out and house one of these families, which I could easily do. I mean, maybe that's a question I should ask when we get back from the coming into the second hour is why aren't they getting out of there and coming to a place like this? I mean, to people like me that would house them until they got on their feet here in Australia. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Karin Smith, really talking the truth and getting this information out there that should have been out there a long time ago. It's thanks to her that it is now. We'll be right back.
Oh, 7.9 FM here in the Alpines of Australia and 1650 AM Tonawanda, New York.
We need to open our eyes. There's over 2 million illegal immigrants bedding down in this state tonight. This state spent $3 billion last year on services for those people who had no right to be here in the first place. $3 billion. $400 million just to lock up a bunch of illegal immigrant criminals who only got into this country because the fucking INS decided it's not worth the effort to screen for convicted felons. Who gives a shit? Our government doesn't give a shit. Our border policy is a joke.
So is anybody surprised that south of the border they're laughing at us? Laughing at our laws?
Yeah. every night, thousands of these parasites stream across the border like some fucking pinata exploded. Don't laugh. There's nothing funny going on here.
Welcome to Two's Company, Three's Allowed, with your host from the land down under, Shaun, a.k.a. Surplus.
Shaun, a.k.a. Surplus.
Dissecting the latest news on the issues that invade your privacy and take away your rights as we move closer to a one-world government. And finding solutions alongside you, the listener, to fight against the New World Order. And now, here's your host, Shaun.
Top of the second hour, ladies and gentlemen. With me is my special guest, Karin Smith, and we're talking about South Africa. We've spoken very quickly in nutshell form about what's taken place in history, and we're talking about what's going on in the present, and we're soon going to be talking about what's probably going to be taking place in the future. Karin, you were explaining to the good audience there that the blacks started getting up to a few shenanigans whilst the water was carrying all of the garbage down through the white villages, or if you want to call it a village, the white housing that didn't even have concrete foundations. Why don't you continue with that, by all means? But we will soon get to asking you the question as why they don't get out of there. Just get out of South Africa, and people like myself, and I'm sure there'd be other Aussies here in Australia that would put these families up until they were on their feet. Go ahead.
When I answer that question, you're going to go crazy. But anyway, so the blacks decided one night that they were going to take over Muncieville and just incorporate it into their squatter camp. And I got this frantic Facebook message from a person in South Africa saying, look, they're hearing gunshots and they're coming for them. So I immediately contacted some security services in South Africa, and I said to them, look, you're going to have to help these people because the police are scared to go in there. And in any case, I'm not very sure that they're going to help the whites. So we quickly got a whole band of people together with pickups, I think you call them. We call them bakkies in South Africa. And they went through the bush on the other side of the camp and escorted all the children out and took them to a safe place and fed them pizza and let them watch TV and kept them safe. But the parents didn't want to leave because they said the minute they vacate their huts, they won't be able to come back.
Yeah.
Anyway, a clash was avoided by the security forces. But it was an awful thing because we had recently put up porta potties for these families because they had no latrines at all. And they burnt those. So the next morning they took photographs and they were just these big puddles of green plastic because they're big green places, the porta potties, where they burnt the porta potties down. It really has been an awful thing. And in order to get any supplies or donations, whatever, to the white camp, you have to go through the black camp. And these black children will stand in front of your car so that you have to slow down while the adults steal whatever you've got on the back of your truck and take it. And if you finally do get anything through to the white camp and they form a line to be handed out the food and the clothing, etc., the blacks will come and stand in the line as well. So you have to give it to them. Now they have got government-provided housing, which are brick houses with 2 or 3 rooms in them. They have satellite dishes on the roof. They have running water. They have geysers, for hot water. They have flush toilets. They have all these things. Plus, they have child grants every month. They have health grants every month. They have social security grants every month. They get paid by the government. Now, this little white remnant don't get anything from the government. And as I said before, the big companies, no company is allowed to donate to them. So they are totally dependent on the other white people in South Africa. Now, it's been estimated that there are 70 million people in South Africa at the moment. We don't know because getting figures out of that government is impossible.
Yeah.
Of whom 3.5 million are whites. And of that 3.5 million, 1 million are living in circumstances worse than those that I've just described to you. Worse than that. Now, these children can't go to school because in South Africa you pay for school. You don't have a school bus to take them. You take them yourself. They have to wear uniforms. You have to pay for their books and so on. So the parents who can't even feed the kids or house them obviously can't afford that. And there's no free schooling. So the whole generation are being starved. They have got learning disabilities and bad cognitive functioning, and they don't reach the milestones that children normally reach because they're hungry, they're not fed, they're dirty, they don't know where their next meal is coming from. They have that look in their eyes that scares the living daylights out of me.
Yeah.
Those children have that hopeless, gazing off into the distance look. I don't know how to explain it, but it is the most hopeless, terrible look that children should never have in their eyes.
That sense of dread sort of thing. I know what you're talking about. It's terrible.
And the parents obviously are worse. And my fear is that the longer that they stay in those circumstances, the more they become dependent on handouts and unable to lift themselves out of it because all sense of personhood and hope has gone.
Well, imagine the depression, the depression that these parents especially, I mean, see, kids, they're resilient to a certain degree where they don't totally understand what's going on because at the moment it's their norm, let's face it. So they're resilient to that, but the parents, they know better. So imagine the depression that they're going through whilst they're trying to feed their kids the next meal. I couldn't imagine it. It's beyond me.
No, I can't either, Shaun. My heart absolutely breaks about those people. I can't, and the world has turned a blind eye to it totally.
Well, we've got to do something. There must be something, and maybe this is a good time to bring that question up. How come we can't get them out of there, Karin? Why can't we get them out of there? And I mean, I've got extra rooms here. I mean, that they could stay in until they're on their feet, until they find a job and then able to get their own places. Why can't we get them out of there and start working towards that?
Because some members of my family tried to come to Australia. You need an awful lot of money to immigrate to Australia. Those people have got nothing, number one.
Yeah.
They couldn't pay for air ticket. They couldn't support themselves for the time that is required in Australia. I think it's a year. I know New Zealand is a year. You have to prove you have funds to support yourself for a year.
Yeah.
And if at the end of that year you have not got a job and are self-supporting, you get sent back. So they don't have that means. And unless the UN and Amnesty International declare them as refugees, no country is going to take them.
Yeah.
So they are stuck there. The people, mostly people who could leave, have left, except the ultra-rich who are still making their fortunes out of what's left of the country.
Can we work towards that? Can we work towards that? Can we work towards getting them refugee status perhaps? Is there a way to do that, or do they have some sort of sick law that stops them from doing that as well, which wouldn't surprise me?
Well, we've been to the UN and we've been to the International Criminal Court and we've been to the Unrepresented Nations Organization, and all of them have promised to look into it. Now, about 2 years ago, a group called Front National went to the UN on behalf of the white people of South Africa because in the 22 years that the ANC have been in power, 85,000 whites have been murdered in the ways that I have just described to you.
Good God.
Now, they have genocided their language, their culture, their churches, their statues, their schools, and the people themselves. So they went to the UN to make a plea on behalf of the whites of South Africa, and the ANC government stood up right there in the UN meeting and said, "Oh, you lie, you racist, what, and what." And the American representative at that meeting said, "No, let them speak. I want to hear their side of it." Well, they came away quite convinced that something was going to be done. Well, it's 2 years later and nothing has been done. A really great Dutch journalist, Adriana van State, She worked in South Africa for very many years as a journalist and then went back to the Netherlands, and she campaigned on behalf of white South Africans. She got Jeffrey Stanton from Genocide Watch, which is a very left-leaning organization based in the States. She got him to go to South Africa and observe what was happening. And he put white South Africans at stage 6 of 8 stages of genocide. 6 being the preparation stage, 7 being it in full force, and 8 being the denial stage. So we're in preparation stage.
Yeah.
And he spoke out to the world, and nobody took any notice. So he went back a second time in 2014, I think was the last time he was there, and said exactly the same thing. The world, he would go to the governments of the world and explain what was going on there and get some action. But nothing has happened.
This is disgraceful.
No.
We're in the year 2017, and we are of the intelligence that we are as high IQ human beings, and we can't even somehow, I mean, straight away, something happens to Israel, we're over there to help, but we're seeing what's going on over in South Africa and nothing's done. This is just, I can't believe it.
The world has turned their back on us, Shaun, and apart from that, I really do believe that South Africa has been the blueprint for the rest of the world. What they did was bring these rules in slowly in South Africa, and wait. Bring in one rule and wait and see if the world is going to stand up and pay attention. Nothing happens. So
the frog in the frying pan. Yeah, yep.
And so on. And so it is now happening all over the world. You've seen these black African refugees flowing into Europe, into your own country, into the USA, pouring in by their hundreds of thousands, taking over the country, expecting everything for nothing, raping, plundering, slaughtering, burning, rioting, doing the things that they do at home and doing them there. So South Africa was the blueprint for this, to see whether the world would stand up and do something, and they have not.
Yeah.
So I want to explain to you how living in South Africa is for an everyday person. So prior to 1994, we maybe had a fence around our properties and burglar bars on our windows, maybe. After 1994, you suddenly had to put an 8-foot wall around your property. And that sufficed for a little while. Then you had to put electric wiring on top of that 8-foot wall, and electric gates and security gates on your front and back doors, and a security gate leading to the bedrooms of the house, so you could close yourselves in your bedrooms if somebody came into the house at night. Then you had to connect to a security company who would come if you hit the alarm bell. But it all happened so slowly that we became prisoners in our own homes without noticing.
And this all costs a hell of a lot of money too, to set up this sort of security.
Amount of money.
Yeah.
The 2 biggest growing businesses in South Africa are the funeral business and the security companies.
There we go.
The biggest growing companies. So then you get locked into your house. So obviously you can't see your neighbor, so you don't have those little chats over the fence during the day while you're hanging up your washing or whatever. You don't trust your neighbor. But the fact that you're a prisoner inside also means nobody can see what's going on inside. So if you're being robbed or whatever, nobody knows. And that's how they get away with 3 days in your house.
Yeah.
And nobody notices. Now, if you want to leave for work in the morning, you first go onto the internet and check where there's a riot or a protest. Is your route to work safe? Then you get into your car, lock the doors, open your electric gate, scoot out the gate, sit there in your car waiting for the gate to close, and go to work, hoping that you get to work safely, and do it in reverse on the way home. And of course, if your dogs are not out there to greet you, then you don't get out of your car.
Okay, hold that thought there, Karin, because we're going to come up to a break. Again, just fascinating stuff, and I'm not talking about fascinating isn't a good thing. I'm saying just fascinating that the world doesn't know this. I mean, there's a lot of things you're talking about here that I had no idea about, and I'm sure the audience are getting something from this as well. Something needs to be done, and we'll talk about that later in the show, ladies and gentlemen. But what Karin's saying here is just absolutely horrific. We'll be right back.
This program contains material which some audiences might find objectionable. We suggest that you use discretion while listening. After all, you have free will and can turn it off if you don't like the content. So, if you choose to listen to the entire program and then write us to complain that you were appalled by what you heard, you can blow it out your ass. You were warned. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to WTFR, where thought is free radio. If you haven't already, get on over to TCTAunleashed.com and take a look at what we've got to offer. If you're interested in becoming a host, by all means give me a yell. DESSNR@hotmail.com. That's DESSNR@hotmail.com. Again, thanks for listening.
Could you be responsible for creating another lifelong addiction to pokies? Don't take your child into a pokey pub to eat or play. Families are encouraged inside to experience the thrill of an easy win. But don't forget, losers play pokies.
Please don't make me a loser. Don't gamble with my life.
You can help stop this pokey assault on our children. Sign the electronic petition at pokyact.org.
Choose Company 3 is allowed. My special guest, Karin Smith, talking about what's been going on out there in South Africa, something that most people wouldn't have a clue about. I know that a lot of Australians have no clue, that's for sure, because, you know, when I talk to them about what I do know about it, they've just been clueless as to the activity. So it's just great to have Karin, a lady that has lived over there and had to experience this sort of thing firsthand and is still experiencing it, really, because Karin, if I'm not mistaken, and I know you want to finish what you were saying there, we'll get to that in a moment, but if I'm not mistaken, you still communicate with people over there and you're still trying to help people over there. So it's in fact a nightmare that hasn't really ceased for you.
No, because Shaun, when I came to the USA, and I did not flee South Africa, I married a South African, an American in South Africa. And because he was a white man, he couldn't get a job there. And after 2 years, he said, no, this is ridiculous. A real man does not get supported by his wife. We're going back to my own country where I can support you. So it was a big decision for my family, because at that stage, my dad and my mom was still alive. And I have a large family. It was a big decision for all of us. And I knew that once I left, I would not be able to go back. So we had a family talk about it, and they all decided that it would be best if I came and cleared the way for my daughter and my grandchildren.
Yeah.
And got them out of there. So I didn't flee, but it's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to leave the country. Because although the blacks tell you, we're going to chase you into the sea and you must go because you've stolen our land and we're going to take it back, when you go to the government departments to get the paperwork you require, it is an absolute damn nightmare. To go to any country, you need what is called an unabridged birth certificate. Well, it can take you 2 years to get that out of the South African government.
And by then you could be dead.
Exactly. And you need a police clearance certificate. Well, that's a damn joke. I went and paid 500 Rand for mine. And when it came, I took it to this American embassy and I said, right, here it is. And they said, no, it's printed on the wrong paper, take it back. So I had to go and pay another 500 Rand and wait another year before I could get that paperwork.
That's disgusting.
So It's a nightmare. It's an absolute damn nightmare to try and get out of that country. And they only allow you a certain amount of your belongings and your money and whatever to take with you.
So it truly is a prison. They're living in a prison. That's the only way you can explain it. These white South Africans are living in a prison.
They absolutely are. They are, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. So, together with all the murders, and I people who say it's karma, because you will be told that. I'm told that all the time. It's karma for what we did during apartheid. I would encourage them just to Google farm murders South Africa. And you need a very, very strong stomach to look at the pictures that come up.
I've seen some of those, and ladies and gentlemen, just be warned, these pictures are of the most horrific nature. So you need a strong stomach. Go ahead, Karin.
Shaun, and these things, they may say it's karma, but really no white person ever did that to a black person, and no white person born after the end of apartheid deserves that treatment.
No.
And no child deserves at the age of 6 months to be raped or to be kidnapped for their body parts for what the blacks called muti, which is a mixture made by the witch doctors to make them stronger, to cast curses, to make love potions, whatever. If you use body parts, it makes it a stronger potion.
Oh, it makes you want to vomit.
Nobody deserves that.
It makes you want to vomit. It makes me swallow. It makes me almost cry every time you say the word children, because they don't understand any of this. They're innocent in this, and all of a sudden they're being raped with a bottle or having the boiling oil poured over them. It's heartbreaking.
I never get used to it, Shaun, and I generally end a program that I'm on in tears. And for me, you were saying that I haven't escaped it. No, I haven't, because I raise money for these people, because the one thing that these charities cannot get in South Africa is money. Nobody has money, and the companies that do are not allowed to give it. So they can get clothes and they can get furniture and they can get those kind of, sometimes food, but they need money, because in order to take these children to doctors and dentists and whatever, you can't bring the doctor a bag of apples and trade with him. They need money, and they can't get it in South Africa.
And let's actually work on getting them that money, ladies and gentlemen. We're soon to announce some websites here. Don't sit there and nod your head, okay? Get off your ass and friggin' do something. For no one else, for the little ones, okay? Because the little ones don't deserve this. You need to do something here. Whatever money you've got free, whether it be $10, $20 or $1,000, we need to get onto these websites that we're soon going to announce and start donating some money. Me included. All right. I'm not a cop out. I will even show you the statement if need be, the receipt if need be, showing that I have donated. What we need to do is start getting these people money so that they can eat and they can have a little peace of mind. The very small peace of mind, at very least, that we can give them that they're not getting over there at the moment. But before we get to the websites and your YouTube channel there, Karin, this is not easy for me either. I've had to swallow hard a few times throughout this broadcast. I want you to finish up your story there about how you said that if you don't have the dogs out at the time, sort of guarding over. Go ahead.
Then you won't go inside. You don't go inside. You get back out. You keep your car locked. You drive out the driveway and you go to the nearest police station. Now, I want to tell you a story about what happened when they shot my father. They attacked the farm. 7 guys carrying AK-47s attacked the farm and kicked in the back door. My dad was ill and he was on oxygen, but he tried to defend the family and they shot him.
Yep.
And they shot my brother in the leg, and my brother got TB in his marrow and had both his feet amputated after that. So my mom, who was in her 80s, phoned the police and said, look, this is what's happened. Could you please send an ambulance and come? And they said to my mother,
take your time.
Can can you identify these people by name? And my mom said, no, of course I can't. And they didn't come. They said, well, then I can't help you.
Unbelievable.
And they didn't come. And to this day, and my mom's now dead, that they have not come. They have not investigated. So the number that I gave you of 85,000 people murdered is quite possibly double that number, because a lot of them are on their death certificate is put natural death. They've been shot 3 times, raped to death, stabbed, drilled with a drill, but it's a natural death. And that's what's put on their death certificate. So we don't know.
So there's never going to be an investigation, because as far as they're concerned, it's natural causes.
Yes, yes. So we will never know how many have actually been murdered in South Africa in the last 20 years. We don't know. And these people really, 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 really need help. I cannot stress it enough. But now I'd like to go on to the more hopeful part of it. Because if I carry on with this, I could carry on for the next 7 hours.
Oh, and if you look at, I mean, if we don't get to something hopeful, I'm going to cry on air myself. I mean, yeah, please, let's get some positivity going here so that we can help them.
Okay. So the Khoi, as I told you in the beginning, were the first people of Southern Africa, the only people there when the whites arrived, which naturally makes the white people the second nation of South Africa, not the blacks. Now, in the last 20 years, the blacks have been incited against the whites by the story that we stole their land and they must take it back from us by any means necessary. So they've been doing that. And they had a thing called Land Redistribution Act, which said that if a black person could prove, that his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather had once grazed a goat on those grounds, and you had a farm there today, then the government would decide what they were going to pay you for the farm, and you had to give the farm back to these black people. So, of course, there's no proof that he grazed the goat there, but nevertheless, the farms were given over to these black people. And some of the biggest, most productive farms in South Africa were handed over to black people. They were the Sepiko tea estates, which were enormous and a huge, huge means of export income for the country. That was handed over to the blacks, and it is now barren.
I was about to say, I did actually, I recall you talking about this at one stage and looked into it myself, and then they were sort of calling for the whites to come back because their economy started failing due to the poor management of these farms.
Yes, yeah, that was in Zimbabwe though,
okay.
Not in South Africa.
Right.
The same thing though. So there's this huge orange farm, and I mean huge. It was thousands of hectares. And they exported oranges to every country in the sun. In fact, if you bought an orange, it probably came from Zebediela. Well, they gave this to the blacks. So the first winter, they chopped down all the orange trees for firewood. They took the roof off the house to build little shacks, and they used the house for their cattle pen. And that was the end of Zebediela. So why the government thinks that this is a good idea, I don't know.
And isn't it funny, we're about to come to a break, Karen. I do apologise for interrupting you, because when you're on fire, all of a sudden, you're cut off because of a break. But allow me to say this, isn't it funny that there's something familiar about what you're saying? Over here in Australia, the Aboriginals are often put into what's called community or even commission housing. And what they quite often do is they conveniently forget to pay their gas bills with welfare money. And so what they do is they tear up the house to create a fire literally inside the house. They'll tear up the floor and create like a small fire in the middle of the living room to be able to warm themselves at night. See, we're not just talking about South Africa when it comes to these sorts of things, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, these sorts of things are going on all around the world. And, of course, we dare to discuss this sort of thing. We're called racist, even though all we're doing is we're talking about what goes on around us. This is Two's Company, Three's Allowed, WTFR. We'll be right back after these few messages. Stay tuned. Karin Smith, my special guest.
Break on through to the other side.
There was a place called Detroit, and now it's a disgrace. How quaint it seems that everywhere blacks go en masse, you tend to end up with what Commander Rockwell once called a Negro problem. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to WTFR, where thought is free radio. If you haven't already, get on over to TCTAunleashed.com and take a look at what we've got to offer. If you're interested in becoming a host, by all means give me a yell. DESSNR@hotmail.com. That's DESSNR@hotmail.com. Again, thanks for listening. All the way back when in World War II, well, it's not hard to believe that our governments can create something much more advanced, technologically advanced, and of course we're going to think it's something out of this world.
Well, exactly. There was a surveillance blimp in Seattle a few months ago, and it was owned by the Department of Homeland Security, and it fell from the sky because it got a hole in it, or for whatever reason it fell, and people were freaking out. They saw this big floating silver thing.
Two's Company, Three's Allowed, WTFR. What a convenient bumper tune to come up at this time. Suicidal Dream by Silverchair. As I was saying to Karin just earlier, if I was put in the position where I'd lost my family sort of thing, to give an example, ladies and gentlemen, in front of me where I had my eyelids cut off and I was put in this position where I had to watch my son and my daughter be raped, I'd have to kill myself afterwards. I couldn't live with that. I just could not, just because of I don't call it a failure, Karin. I don't think these males failed. If they didn't have their hands tied by a group of men that could overpower them and everything was fair, they would have defended their families just fine. But nonetheless, I'd have to kill myself because I just couldn't get those images out of my mind for the rest of time. I mean, you'd live a very, very poor quality of life. Now, I know that we want to get to talking about the seceding now because, ladies and gentlemen, just to give you an idea, the reason I brought Karin onto the broadcast in the first place is because in Facebook there was a message that was coming up saying, Karin Smith, it is official, South Africa has seceded and is now the country of good hope under the Khoi San King. We are finally a free and sovereign nation. Thank you to King Cornelius III, Karin Smith, and all the other amazing truth and freedom warriors who have worked so tirelessly to bring an end to the suffering and corruption in South Africa. And it says catch up on the archive, and it's got all of these different links. Now, Karin, you wanted to make a disclaimer to be clear that you really didn't have anything to do with this. Am I not mistaken?
No, I was approached by them about 3 months ago, and I was asked, would I please, they obviously need worldwide media attention on this to make it succeed. So I was sworn to absolute secrecy and asked if I could do this. Now, it was a very hard job to get some interest going before the event without saying what you're trying to do. It became a really catch-22 situation. So at the end of the day, what I thought was I would introduce the Khoi King and his advisors and maybe the Queen to the public through my shows and through other shows, so that people had an understanding of who the Khoi were before this thing went down.
Right.
And that was the only way that I could think of to do it without breaking the vow of secrecy. And then there were some events in South Africa that made the people have to go ahead with this before they were quite ready, because a group of people, a white political party that they had approached to join with them, said, well, if you give us the fracking rights to the Karoo and other financial benefits, we will join with you. And the king said, not a damn are we going to do that. So they said, okay, we're going to bust you to the ANC government, which they went ahead and did. So this thing was forced to happen a couple of weeks before they were perfectly ready for it. However, last Sunday, the 24th of September of this year of our Lord 2017, the Khoi King, King Cornelius III, stood up in front of the castle in Cape Town and declared that this land was his people's land. And they are seceding from South Africa and forming a new nation called the Republic of Good Hope. Well, there was absolutely no media attention to it. In fact, if I had not arranged live streaming to our TV station, there would have been no coverage of it whatsoever.
Can I ask you a quick question to be clear for the audience, Karin? Do you think that this, that the king standing up in front of the castle there, saying what he said, it gives hope, new hope to white South Africans?
To some and not to others. It has created an absolute firestorm on social media. I have been threatened with that I'm committing treason, that I'm sedition, I am the foreign leader of this whole thing. We've been accused of the most terrible things. And of course, because of racism, a lot of the white people do not want to live anywhere that is ruled by other color king.
Yep.
So it has become an absolute firestorm. However, I did interview the legal advisor to the king the other night. He has got qualifications longer than both my arms. He's an incredible man. He's a Khoi himself, and he is a law professor at the University of Florida. I interviewed him the other night, and he explained the entire legality of this. And under international law, maybe not South African law, but under international law, this is perfectly legal what the king has done, as long as he fulfills certain criteria. You know, that he has that he has a shadow government in place, that he is able to govern a country, and most essentially that at least two or more countries accept them as a real country.
At this point, at this point, if I may, I don't think that it matters whether he. I mean, we know he qualifies to be able to lead, if you will. But I don't think that, given South Africa's demise, I don't think it matters whether he stands up and says what he says or not, as long as he's got the power to do it. If he's got the power to take that country into his own hands and nobody can fight back against that, then he should do it, especially if he's qualified, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, given that he is qualified to lead them in a good way, then he should do it.
Well, I interviewed him, and if you go to my YouTube channel, you will find both interviews with the king and with his legal advisor. He is perfectly within his rights internationally. He has not claimed any land that was inhabited by blacks. In other words, the borders of this new country end where they met with the blacks, which is what I tried to stress at the beginning of this talk to you, that it was the Khoi land. They were the only people there. They met the blacks at the Fish River. The boundaries of this new land stop at the Fish River.
Yeah.
Now, the funny thing about all of this has been no response from the ANC, no press coverage, no anything, which is maybe a good thing, because they have got time to get everything in order. They've presented the papers to the Constitutional Court of South Africa, so they have been registered. And now there's just the people are saying, well, it happened on Sunday and nothing's happened yet. But there's an incredible amount of legal work and paperwork and appointments and things that have to happen before this can be accepted by anybody.
It's sort of like an inauguration almost.
Exactly. So there's all this work going on in the background, which obviously is very secret and underground and nobody knows about, who doesn't need to know. And so it's kind of a hiatus happening right now, which is making people even more uncertain about what is happening.
Okay,
so
I know that you've got to go at the next break, and we've literally got less than 4 minutes before the next break. Karin, before you give us a closing shot about where you think things are going to go for South Africa from here on in, since they're seceding, could you get some websites out there and also get the website out for where people can reach your archives that you've been doing with Jeff Rentz?
Yeah, you would have to go to Jeff Rentz there because I've been on him every night this week. Tonight, I think, is my last night, but I've done a lot of work on Jeff Rentz. You would have to go to him, which is rentz.com. If you want to donate, the only white charity that I would recommend in South Africa, because there are an awful lot of people making money out of people's misery, this charity, I know the people, I've done work for them. On their website every day are pictures of what they've been doing, so you know that your money is going to the right place. They're all volunteers. They don't take a penny for themselves. They don't have overinflated salaries. I put the website up for you, but it's South African Family Relief Project. S for sugar A, F for Freddy R, P for Peter, S for sugar A.org. And if you want to look for me and follow any of my work, RadioFreeSouthAfrica.com is my website, and YouTube is also Radio Free South Africa. And really, I would like to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about this, because somebody needs to do it.
I want to thank you, Karin, because this is not an easy discussion. Rather, it's a difficult one, and you know, the stuff. You're a trooper. You know, you've been working tirelessly behind the scenes and also on air for quite a many years now, and now within the last week you've been 24-hour, almost 24/7 on radio, getting the information out there. It's great stuff indeed. Now, to let the good audience know, what we'll do is we'll put those websites down below the show, the archived show after we're done here, so that you can just click that link if you happen to have access on the internet. Again, don't just be nodding your heads. Make perfectly sure you click those links. If you've got $10, every one of you can go without coffee for a while. You're paying something like a ridiculous price these days for $3 for a coffee down the street. Put that off. You know, what's that? That's 3 by 5. So, make perfectly sure that you donate some of your coffee money to these white South Africans. You're white and bright and beautiful people, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget it. It could be you. Your white and bright and beautiful people need to know what's going on here. Give us a quick closing shot, Karin. We've got less than a minute.
Well, I am hoping and praying and spending all my time on this secession thing right now, because I do feel that even though people do not want to join hands with the other color race, this is the only shot that the minorities in South Africa have of a future at all. So the whole world should be looking at this and rooting for them to make a success of it, or else the Khoi and the whites in South Africa are going to be annihilated, because the blacks, Blackland First, the EFF, and the ANC have all said they are coming for the whites at the end of December this year. By any means necessary, they're going to take their land, their possessions, their everything, and slaughter them. So that is December this year. The annihilation of those people is scheduled for.
Okay, excellent stuff, Karin. Thanks so much for spending the time with us. And literally, you are a trooper. Keep up the good work, and we're going to try and help you wherever we can. We've already had somebody in the chat room on a positive note saying, please have Karin back on again. So people are learning, and I'm sure that through word of mouth, they'll be getting the message out there. Again, Karin, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very, very much, Shaun, and I would love to come back and tell you some more.
Excellent stuff. Okay, thanks, Karen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Karen Smith, my special guest, talking about what took place over there in South Africa. I'll be right back.